Hello Internet friends, my name is Rich. Thanks so much for joining me today in the Toy Isle Alliance YouTube channel. When I had done my Darth's Haul video on Super Friends Superman and Super Friends Aquaman, I had promised I would do a full video on my Super Friends action figure collection, and because I am probably the most honest person in the world, I want to keep my word and do a video on my Super Friends action figures. And we'll look at a few other things as well that are Super Friends related. So let's get to it. Back here we have Apache Chief. He was a collect and connect figure from a wave of DC Universe classics, which included Black Vulcan, Samurai, and El Dorado, as well as a few others. These weren't part of that new multiverse Super Friends wave, but they're clearly these are characters that really only appeared in Super Friends. A lot of people didn't like that wave of DC Universe classics. It was one of my favorites because I am such a Super Friends fan. Here we have the Wonder Twins. They were a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive. However, not every set came with Gleek, so I actually had these for the longest time and just got Gleek recently. So that's very cool to have those guys as well. Here is the Multiverse Super Friends Green Lantern. He had to borrow someone else's power lantern or power battery. That Green Lantern effect, I believe, is from a John Stewart figure. And then in the middle here, we have the Mattel Super Friends Superman and the Mattel Super Friends Batman with their cool superpowers-esque fabric capes. And that Wonder Woman is actually the Superpowers repaint of Wonder Woman. And I figured that was a pretty close match for a Super Friends Wonder Woman. So that's why she's there. Robin is the regular DC Universe Classics Robin. I had two of them. So, of course, I would put one with Batman in my Super Friends display. And there is Aquaman from the Multiverse Super Friends wave. I love the colors on him. And this Hall of Justice was it's actually coming apart, was actually from the Young Justice 3 1/4 wave figures. This was basically a collect and connect Hall of Justice. So I desperately wanted this just for my Super Friends figures. And down here we of course have the arch nemesis of Super Friends. We have the Legion of Doom. So there in the middle is Lex Luthor. He was he came in a 4-pack or a 5-pack. I think it was a Walmart exclusive. There's the Riddler, Cheetah. Back there is Giganta. She is a very hard collect and connect. I'm just going to say build-a-figure because that's a lot easier to say. She was a very hard build-a-figure to put together because some of the figures were hard to find that were in that wave. There's Toyman. He was also in that Apache Chief build-a-figure wave. There's Brainiac. I think he was in a 2-pack. I'm not sure. Black Manta. Now, there actually is a Black Manta that's repainted in purple. That was in a 2-pack. And purple, it looks much closer to how he looked in Super Friends, so I might try to track that down one of these days. There's the Build-A-Figure Solomon Grundy. There is Bizarro from the DC Superheroes line, the sort of the precursor to DC Universe Classics. There is a new Bizarro coming out that looks a little more Super Frenzy, and when I pick that up, he'll probably replace this Bizarro in the display. Over here, there's Sinestro back there. That is the first Sinestro they released was way too short, and this was in a 2-pack with the corrected height. And there is, oops, there's my finger. There is Captain Cold, who's also way too short, but what are you going to do? We're probably not going to get another classic Captain Cold anytime too soon. There is Joker, who is not an official member of the Legion of Doom in Super Friends cartoon, but I just felt he fit there. Mr. Mxyzptlk, also not an official member of the Legion of Doom. However, he was a villain on the Super Friends a lot. And when I was a kid, I actually thought he was just created for the cartoon, so I figured he fit. There's Scarecrow. That's also from the DC Superheroes line that came out before DC Universe Classics. And there is the Build-A-Figure Gorilla Grodd back there. So there you go. There are my figures. I found this at a thrift store a couple of years ago. It is a Super Friends comic book. It's actually the oversized edition, which has a bunch of issues of the regular Super Friends comic book. I also have the first issue of that regular Super Friends comic book, but it's in a long box hidden away somewhere. So there you go. Here is my Super Friends DVD collection. I have no idea if these are in order, but I'm pretty sure I have every incarnation of Super Friends that was released on DVD. So really, really happy to have this in my collection. It's funny, Wendy and Marvin, who I used to see in old issues of the Super Friends comic book when I was a kid, I had never seen that season of Super Friends. That was the very first season of Super Friends. Wendy and Marvin were sort of the precursor to the Wonder Twins. I never knew they were actually in Super Friends. I thought they were just made for the comic book. So yeah, when I got that DVD, it was my first time seeing those episodes. I wish they all matched a little bit more, and maybe had something matching on the spines, because I'm obsessive compulsive that way. But if you research the seasons of the Super Friends, I mean, it's kind of crazy. Sometimes they were an hour, sometimes they were shorts. All I know for sure that the last two seasons were, in this order, Super Friends, the Legendary Superpowers show, was the second to last season. I think that's when Adam West started doing Batman's voice. And this is where they introduced Firestorm to the Super Friends. And this was the final season where Super Friends wasn't even in the title. It was just the Superpowers team with the Galactic Guardians. And that is where Cyborg joined the Super Friends. So there you go, guys. Just a look at some of my Super Friends stuff. I know DC Direct did a line of Super Friends figures, and they were actually sculpted to look like the Alex Toth models. I would love to track those down. There's my remote control as well. I would love to track down those DC Direct figures, but they're kind of expensive. But that'll probably be the next thing I look for that is Super Friends related. So there you go, guys. Just a quick look at all things Super Friends that I own. So thank you so much for watching. And until next time, Super Friends, I will see ya.